personal assets are protected if you are an incorporated entity. They can't come after your house and your car and your personal computer. They can only come after the assets of the corporation. Incorporation encourages increased accountability. Most states do have requirements for incorporation depending on the nature of the corporation. A sole proprietorship, meaning I am the company, I own the company, I am the only person responsible for it, you know, that's different. But if you incorporate limited liability corporation, LLC, we see that in those initials everywhere. They require boards, they require bylaws, they require processes and procedures depending on how much money the organization is going to deal with. They will require annual tax filings and reporting and things of that nature. If you're starting an organization that is going to be charitable in nature, if you want to start an organization that your primary purpose is getting funds to the local transgender and LGBT youth shelter, or you want to do funds into AIDS research, or support for the victims of a particular disease, or the Charlotte tradesmen, their big thing is supporting House of Mercy, which is a hospice. Yeah. If your primary purpose is charitable, incorporate. And you want to look at going the full-blown IRS 501c3 not-for-profit route, because that allows people to deduct their donations. The Tar Heels are a not-for-profit registered in North Carolina. We are not a 501c3, but we are a not-for-profit. We don't make enough money in a year to report and have to do annual filings with the state of North Carolina. We might funnel $2,500, $3,000 a year into our local charities, which are Triad Health Project, which provides support for AIDS victims and their families, and North Star LGBT Center in Winston-Salem. We raise funds for them. We donate what we can. We do food drives and things of that nature, but we're not a big enough organization to rate a 501c3. But long run, if we keep growing and get back to where we were, we're going to look at 501c3. There are several different chapters or sections in the IRS code. C7s are like educational foundations, I think. The Woodhull Freedom Foundation, is like a C7. NCSF is a C7, or the NCSF Foundation is a C7. But there are all kind of different aspects of that. I am not an accountant. I am not an attorney. And I for damn sure am not a tax lawyer. So I'm not going to tell you what to do, but these are things to look at and consider. Jump on.
And some of them you might think about that don't need to be incorporated. You're not going to incorporate your munch group unless you're collecting funds for charity, really. You're meeting and having lunch. You don't need to incorporate a munch group. If you're going to set up a group that does private play, you're meeting at people's houses, any money, if you collect any money, it is only to cover the food cost. You're not making any money from it at all. You don't really need to incorporate a play party. It's just a play party. And I've heard people talk about this, where they've had play parties, and do you think I need to become a real business name? And it depends on the purpose of your play party. And if you have SIGs, small discussion groups, you really wouldn't incorporate those because of the purpose of the group. It's going to go, and it's going to be very specific. It's not going to be a money-making venue or venture. Usually groups like that are like, you bring the chips, you bring the soda, I'll bring the cups and the plates. And it works like that, so there really isn't a reason to incorporate. You don't gain anything by it. You're not protecting anything because you're not going to have the assets to protect or the money to protect. And they're not going to cost your personal life anything if they fall apart. I've never heard of people suing a munch group. So.
Might sue the restaurant, but you know, if the coffee's too hot, you spill it in your lap. So, yeah, and you figured out what you're going to do and where you're going to do it and when you're going to do it and all that fun stuff. Now you need to figure out, how am I going to run this thing? Way back in the long time ago when I was first getting started and I was traveling to different places to meet people, go to classes, to see how things were run, I ran across a lot of different ways groups and organizations were run. One of the biggest groups, and at the time, one of the most successful groups I had ever encountered, was an organization in Austin, Texas called GWIN, Group with No Name, GWNN. I still have my GWIN pin on my vest. I'm very proud of my association with that group. And GWIN was a dictatorship. And at the time I joined, there were 750 members of that group. And it was a dictatorship. It's my group, I run it my way, and it ran very well because of the personality of the individual who was in charge. Sam was freaking awesome. Dictatorships can be wonderful, depending on the person running it. Sam got people to do things. He delegated authority. He but he was the guy in charge. And the buck stopped with him. He accepted that responsibility. That was his baby. Because it had been handed off to him. The actual founder of the group had but Sam was very cool. The problem with dictatorships, though, becomes succession. Mm-hmm. Because when you burn out, or you get a job transfer or whatever, and it's time for that dictator to move on, if there's not a clear line of succession, if they make a poor choice handing off the group, chaos can ensue. And this is what we found out with Quinn. It got passed on to somebody it should not have been passed on to. On paper, it looked like a good idea. It was passed on to the president of the National Leather Association president there in Austin. However, Gwin was a much, much, much larger group with much, much, much deeper pockets. And the NLA group there, which sponsored the Texas Leather Pride event, looked at Gwin and said, cash cow. And they commingled funds.
Huh.
So somebody knows exactly what I'm talking about. So, yeah, that was not good. There are rifts from that time period that are still not being reached across in Austin. And this was years and years ago. You can form, dictatorships get things done usually. Again, that if you incorporate as a sole proprietorship, that's a dictatorship. You can have employees, but you're the boss. You can have an appointed board. Generally speaking, appointed boards can be considered a dictatorship by committee. Appointed boards generally self-appoint. We're the people that started the group, we're going to be in charge. SC Locke in Greenville, South Carolina was an appointed board. And their members, when they felt it was time to leave the board would select somebody to bring in and work with the board. Again, with the right people, appointed boards get things done. And they may not have formal positions like president or chairman or treasurer or whatnot, but somebody will handle the money, somebody will handle organizing events, somebody will handle getting, volunteers to do things, but that appointed board will do things. Appointed boards will usually work well until there's some kind of major personal schism or falling out. If there's a couple on a board and they split up, and you get half the board going he said and half the board going she said, or half the board going he said and half the board going he said, and though it'll create a schism. A lot of times, if you don't have a way of handling that, and we'll cover this in a little bit in looking at dealing with conflict. But appointed boards can work very well.
And then you have the elected board, and I think that's probably the one that most people are familiar with. They have a group, somebody or a group will found another group, they'll create this group. And then once they have membership, they'll say, okay, we need to have a president, a vice president, a secretary, a treasurer, and then people will go, I'll run for this office, and then everybody votes. And everybody's votes carries the same weight, and you elect your board like that. A lot of the leather clubs are run that way nowadays. And it's elected, so every member feels they had a voice in who is running the group. So there is a positive there, but everything's being voted on, which takes more time in processing everything. When you're having meetings, it takes longer to have a meeting because it's no longer, the five of us has made the decisions and this is what we're going to do. That is a faster process. When you have a board, it's the board recommends these things, what do you think? Let's vote. And so it becomes a little bit more time consuming in the operation of the meetings and going forward with things. And you can still wind up with a division within the board due to personalities. You have a board of 6 to 7 people and you hurt my feelings and you still wind up with, you can still wind up with a rift that creates a division, which gets carried over to the membership as well. So you have to try to watch those things and bridge those kind of gaps between them.
Yeah. Do we have anyone in the class that is a member of the Society of Friends or identifies as Quaker? Then my family background on my mother's side is, Quaker background, and Quaker communities do things by consensus. Sometimes, and I've been part of groups that were run by consensus, and that's pretty much everybody comes to a unanimous decision on what's going to be done and how things are going to be done. Everybody reaches an agreement on it, and consensus groups are very, very inclusive because it's total buy-in. You are part of the process, you are part of the solution, and you agree with what's being done. However, groups run by consensus are can be very slow and deliberate. Some things go very quickly. Some things don't get discussed a whole lot. It's like everybody's going, yep, that's a good idea. Yep, let's do it. Yep, let's run forward. And then you get the one guy who goes, I'm not buying into this. Sell it to me. Why should we be doing it this way? Why should we be taking that action? And one person in a group by consensus can make things very slow and very deliberate. And in a group that's run by consensus, nothing gets done until everyone is on board. So they can be very slow. How formal do you want your group to be? The more formal the group is, the more you are going to need bylaws. If it's a dictatorship and you're running things your way, not so much. You don't need bylaws because we're doing it my way. My decisions. If I don't like something, I will change it. If you don't like something, bring it to me, and if I agree with you, I might change it. And if I don't agree with you, no, it's my way or the highway. Appointed boards, maybe not on bylaws. If you have a dictatorship with an advisory board, think of it as like a constitutional monarchy. You probably want to have bylaws, at least for how to dealing with succession in the board and all of that stuff. But you have to look at the bylaws. If you have an elected board, you're going to need them. If nothing else, to deal with succession, how people get elected to office, and how to replace somebody who quits the job or gets removed from office or kicks the bucket in the middle of a term. You got to put that down. We'll go into some more reasons to cover bylaws when we get into dealing with conflicts, which we're getting close to here. But, as a group leader, particularly if you are looking at building a group that is going to require any kind of board, you're going to want to develop traits that encourage rapport, trust, and confidence with the members of the organization and group. Be attentive. Encourage the people that are involved with running the board to be attentive. Listen to what the members are telling you. And again, I come back to that. If you feel a certain way, other people are going to feel a certain way. If one member is telling you there is a problem There are other people in the group that feel like it's a problem. Listen to them. It may not be something that you consider a priority or an issue, but it is something that needs to be considered. Keep focused on the task at hand. You're starting a group, stay focused on the startup. Don't be thinking about what you're going to do next year. Don't be looking that far ahead yet. Stay focused on the task ahead. Allow for that future planning. We have a run coming, our group, Tar Heel Leather Club, has our run in July. This is what we're focused on. We want to get that run in. It's a 3-day weekend. We're going to have a lot of parties. We're going to have fun. But we're already looking at next year's venue, because the venue we have this year, it was fine for us to get back up on our feet and get the thing going, but we need more than what this venue is providing. So we're looking ahead also. But we're staying focused on this run in front of us that we've got coming up. I talked earlier about developing risk awareness and acceptance. Group leaders, good group leaders, understand that there are risks to everything we do, and not just for outing. There are financial risks if you're going to be running a play space, a dungeon. Okay, you're sinking your money into this business in the hopes that you're going to have people coming in and at least covering your expenses for running the place. There are risks involved, financial risks. Group leaders need to be willing to accept risk, because there is no growth or change without it. You're taking a chance. If you change something, maybe it gets better, maybe it doesn't. But good group leadership is not foolhardy. They're not foolish. They're not going to make changes just to make changes. They're not going to take rash risks. They will take measured risks. Be decisive. Once you make the decision, don't hem and haw about it. Make the decision and jump forward. Move on it. Goes back to that: pick a date, pick a time, get a venue, and stick with it. Once you've made that decision, run with it. And accept ownership. You want your leadership team to own their shit. Because if you're going to crow about when to do something right and succeed, you need to be able to eat crow when you fuck up. When you screw up, own it. My decision, my mistake, I did it. We've had people in our community that have made major mistakes, financial mistakes. I don't know how many people are familiar with Glenda Ryder. Glenda was a huge, huge idol for me personally. I met her way back in a long, long time ago, and I was terribly impressed with this person. She diverted funds that were donated for charity to personal use when she was running IMSL. And knowing Glenda, it was one of those things where, I can take this out now and I'll pay it back later. The intentions they were not nefarious intentions, but it got to the point where she realized she could not just put the money back. It had become too large a sum. And she owned it. She fessed up to it. And she walked away from IMSL, and that was her baby. In my opinion of Glenda, it grew. As disappointed as I was that she had diverted those funds in the first place, the fact that she owned it, stepped up to the plate and said, this is what I did, and I'm sorry, and I have made arrangements to pay these funds back. That's owning your shit, and that gets props, because that was hard to do. It cost her a lot. There's still a lot of people that don't trust her. I don't know that I would trust her running any kind of charity that I had to funnel stuff through, at least not right now. But I can give her credit for stepping up and owning her decisions. If you're running a group or an organization, you need to build bridges. You need to reach out to other community leaders, other organizers. You need to try and keep a professional, courteous, civil relationship with them. Even if you're starting a group because you don't get along with the leaders of the other group that's already there, don't start a pissing match with them. Don't schedule your events on the same day they're scheduling their events. Don't be a douche. Be professional, be courteous, and build bridges, because you know what? There are going to be people in their group that will want to come to the stuff you're doing because it's different, it's new. But if you create the rivalry, it becomes an us or them situation, not us and them. If you don't put people in the position of having to choose, you're much more likely to get people that will be friendly and encouraging and participating in both. Yes?
So on that note, which was one of the main reasons why I wanted to come, because our community is so saturated with events, it's difficult to find a space where you're not cannibalizing. So the decision I made was not to advertise, because I felt as a group leader in a startup that, you know, there's so, one, people are burnt out just with their time, their talent, their service to other organizations. Not burnout is the word, maybe committed. So there's a commitment there. So even though they may want to participate, it's difficult to ask people in the community to choose, even if it is something that's new and is very niche-y and it's not being offered. So on one hand, I've had the conflict of I don't want to cannibalize other groups. I don't want to pull talent and resources that are already in other groups, but I want to advertise because I do know that the niche that we have is not being served in the community.
Right.
So it's a hard balance. And how do you, I really liked what you said about the not statements. So this is not a group meant to cannibalize other groups.
Yeah.
How do you do that balance?
That's a difficult thing to find sometimes. You know, when I started T3 in '99, you know, my closest competition were an hour and a half to 2 hours away. You know, Charlotte, Greenville, Charleston, South Carolina, Myrtle Beach. You know, I didn't have to worry about that as a group startup. Now, in Greensboro, in the Triad area of North Carolina, we have Tar Heel Leather Club. We have the Community House play space. We have La Fortress play space. There are two different TNG groups. There's a Munch group that meets twice a month. So yeah, it's gotten to the point now in a lot of areas where every weekend there's at least one event going on, one group organization meeting, something. Here in Atlanta, I don't even want to think about it.
Every night. You can
Forget
go
about it. In Atlanta,
Yeah.
there's going to be there are going to be
That's-
scheduling conflicts.
Yeah.
You're going to be cannibalizing. There's no way to avoid it.
Yeah, that's where I am, and it's,
Yeah.
that's tough.
Here, and it is tough. But again, you look at your target demographic and you go for the specialization. We don't want to take everybody away. We don't want to take, anybody that doesn't want to give us the commitment. But we're here for this special purpose group demographic.
And one of the things I would do is I would look to find the group that is like almost the exact opposite. So, because like in Charlotte, there's the Charlotte Tradesmen. It's all men. There's another leather club that started, Appalachian Women of Leather. They have their meetings on the same night because one's a men's group and one of them's a women's group. They're not in competition.
Yeah,
You don't
different-
have to pick which meeting to go to. You pick the one that works. And so if someone's having a dominance, a group for dominance, only dominant person, that would be the perfect time to have one for the submissive slaves, because you're looking at where you're going to have something that you're going to put it purposefully on a night where something else isn't happening that's exactly the same, but almost like the exact opposite. Like it's not going to be the same people. They're not going to go to both, or the likelihood of them going to both is slim. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Does
except
that
it's for
help?
switches.
So, yeah, putting the switches on the same night as the dominants and submissive cities is going to kill your attendance.
Exactly.
Because they're going to go one or the other.
Exactly, so, but thank you, that does help. So-
But yeah, go to an off week, go a weeknight. If they're doing stuff on Friday or Saturday, Wednesday night, Thursday night, there's no such thing as a perfect date and time. Somebody will have to work because of their job schedule. Somebody will have they've got another event that they committed to 6 months ago or whatever. So it's tough. We see a lot of groups starting up for you see pansexual groups starting up in areas where they have gay and lesbian groups. You see gay and lesbian groups starting up because they don't feel right in the pansexual atmosphere. We're seeing a lot of growth in the TNGs because the under 35s don't like the creepy old guys like me, staring at the hot young chicks going, ooh, rocker. It's we see the groups for like Lady D's Pep for Pop, people of color. We're getting all the little subgroups, and that's why I say build the bridges with the other groups, because it's great to have these specialized groups, but you need to build the bridges so that when there are big issues that we can all work together with, we can come together. We have those open doors and the open lines of communication that we can work together on big community projects. The pride groups in our area are very good about that. They reach out to all the little niche groups and be part of this, because we're all in the same boat. We're fighting the same battles. The transgender community, we're seeing more transgender specific groups coming up because there are more transgender people who are out than ever before. And this is a good thing. I love seeing all this stuff going on. And I love having that communication and the stuff going on. So, actually, I'm just going to give all that stuff. Let's go right here. Because time constraints. I knew I had an hour and a half to fill, so I put in a lot of information to cover. And we're coming up on that time now. I talked earlier about conflicts within the group. People are people are people are people. Everywhere you go, no matter where you are, no matter when you are, no matter who you're dealing with people. And there are going to be conflicts. Somebody wants to do things one way, somebody wants to do things another. How do you resolve that conflict? When you're dealing with groups, there's no hard and fast rules for the group composition. But in my experience and in my training, and I was a law enforcement officer for 17 years, and I did a lot of community policing, and I helped a lot of neighborhood watch groups and stuff get formed. And we did a lot of group dynamic training to help people develop this stuff. And generally speaking, if you get more than 10 to 12 people really is where it starts to come into play. Your group is going to divide up into 3 sections. You're going to have your sycophants, or sycophants, however you pronounce that. 10 to 20% of the group, leadership can do no wrong. You're our leader, you're our leader, you're our leader. And if you listen to them, you will think everything is sunny and rosy and the sun shines out your ass and it's wonderful.
No, that's right, Rose.
And 10 to 20% of the people in your group are going to be the exact opposite. They are the dissidents. And you will deal with them because nothing you do is right. If you ask them, what should I do? And they say, do X, Y, and Z. And you do X, Y, and Z. Trust me, the dissidents will find something to bitch about what you did. Even though it was exactly what they said you should do. The dissidents are going to be there. You're going to deal with them. And then you have the silent majority, which will be anywhere from 60 to 80% of your group. And they're the people who will sit back and put up with damn near anything that you do as long as it doesn't bite them in the wallet too hard. And as long as they're having fun. They will put up with the sycophants, they will put up with the dissidents, and they will put up with you and your leadership as long as they're having a good time and it's meeting their needs. So you're going to have to find a way to deal with the issues that the sycophants and the dissidents create. You're going to deal with conflict. If you're running a dictatorship and things get too bad, you can always use the my way or the highway approach. Bounce the dissidents out. Understand, however, if you do this often enough, the silent majority will start to view you in a very negative way. Because they're going to see you as being a hard ass. They're going to see you as not listening. They're going to see you as not caring. Especially if it's an issue they happen to agree with the dissidents about. Just because somebody is in that dissident category doesn't mean that the problem that they're bringing up isn't a problem. They may not agree with your solution to it. But it doesn't mean it's not a problem. You need to be able to listen to them. You want to avoid catering to the dissidents. Because, the squeaky wheels are the ones that get all the grease. Well, if you cater to them all the time, the silent majority is going to see you as being wishy-washy. They're going to see you caving in. They're going to lose respect for your leadership. And it doesn't necessarily address the actual issues, because you're dealing with dissidents. They're going to find something to bitch and moan about. Yes?
I've found that if at all possible, if you start putting the dissidents in charge of solving the problem and giving them that authority, or that let them be in charge, then either they shut up or sometimes
They
they
put
actually
up.
fix the problem. Yeah.
And that's one of the things actually one of the points we were going to get to. The people that bring up, problems and issues, engage them in solving the problem. Maybe not necessarily put them in charge of it. Sometimes that works. Sometimes all that does is make them bitch and moan about, you fobbing the problem off on them and yada yada rah rah. You're going to run into that, but engaging them in that solution is very much one of the ways to deal with it. Some groups will set up a very bureaucratic, very by-the-book procedure. When you have bylaws that deal with conflicts within the group, set up those procedures, to be very fair and deliberate. When you use a bureaucratic process, people know that, they understand that. These are the steps you go through. This is what we will do. As long as they bother to read the bylaws. If they don't bother to read the bylaws, then they're going to bitch and moan about that too. But if nothing else, it creates the impression that there is a fair and impartial way of dealing with conflict, and you want to be able to have that because it's being dealt with by people. They may not be fair and impartial at all, but at least the process gives that appearance. You can set up for mediation if you have personal conflicts or issues within the group. Mediation, again, it at least appears on the surface to be a fair process. You have somebody who's not involved or committed to either side of the problem, helping the two parties in conflict reach a mutually acceptable or mutually detestable solution. But everybody gets screwed equally.
Sometimes mediation works well when, if it is actually nothing more than a communication issue, because I've seen people argue and they're saying the same thing. They're saying, I want to paint the walls blue, and they're arguing because the terminology they're using is very different. So they're arguing against each other for the same thing.
Yeah.
Mediation often will help with that because they're listening to what you're saying and they're going, okay, you want the walls blue. And they're listening to what he's saying and they're going, you want the walls blue. Okay, we got this. We're going to paint the walls blue. And they'll use a term that both of you can get at that point, and then you're both going, I win. We're painting the walls blue. And I've seen that go on like that, where mediation did nothing more than take two different languages and put them into one and solve the problems that way.
10-minute warning. So when it comes to in-group conflicts, this is reality. As a group leader, you need to be willing to let the sycophants and the dissidents go. You have to engage the silent majority, because that's where 60 to 80% of your group membership is. You have to engage them. You have to keep them in your corner. If you have to abandon the fringe groups, let them go. If you stifle leadership, or if you stifle dissent, that silent majority, is going to abandon you. If you stifle all dissent, they will abandon you, because they have to feel like, well, if I complain about something, I will be heard. And if you stifle dissent, they will stop feeling that. And you have to be able to make decisions and stick to them in spite of the dissent. Because if you're constantly changing things and you're constantly being wishy-washy, they won't respect your leadership. You have to engage that silent majority. Do not leave them feeling like they're being hung out to dry. When it comes to getting things done, we've talked about the dictatorship and the one-man band, do-it-yourself stuff. Yeah, that gets things done as long as you're a doer. If you're not a doer, you're in trouble. If you're an idea person, find somebody who's a doer you can delegate to. I'm the guy in charge because I come up with all the ideas, but you know what? You're the carpenter. You build it. Rock on. Find your people. Put them together. The problem with dictatorships, because you're the one in charge and you're the one taking all the responsibility, your burnout rate is going to jack through the roof. It's very unusual for a dictatorship type organization or group to last more than 4 or 5 years. Very unusual. Events by committee, spreads the load out, decreases burnout time. If you have a good process of bringing people in, replacing them, so that when the burnout happens or somebody leaves and you've got that succession in there, it can replenish itself. And again, that increases buy-in for the group. Dictatorships, you have to be personable, you have to be charismatic to get the buy-in. Events by committee, on the other hand, because more people are participating, it encourages the buy-in. Events by volunteering is even more buy-in, but you have to get the people to volunteer. Once they start volunteering, a lot of people just, the rewards that are intrinsic with being part of something will generally keep them volunteering, but you have to get them in the door in the first place. It can be like herding cats. You get this volunteer to come over here and do that, and by that time those cats are done water. Yeah. It can be tough. Yeah.
The things that discourage your volunteers, micromanaging them. If I ask you to type up a paper, I shouldn't give you a voice recorder that says it has to be exactly like this. Because I just took away what I asked you to do. I'm now literally micromanaging and telling you everything to say and how to say it or how to type it up. Disorganization. If you're telling your people, we're going to have this, I want these volunteers, here's my room of volunteers, and the volunteers show up and they want to do a job, and they're going, what do I do, where do you want me? And you look at them and go, I don't have a clue. The next time you need volunteers, what's the likelihood of those volunteers coming back when they know they're going to show up and you're going to go, I don't know. It's something. You're going to do something. So being a little more organized with that. And having volunteers come in and do the work, and at the end of the day, you're like, bye. Thank you. Did a great job. Little things like that actually have meaning. That's why they're part of our vocabulary. Show appreciation for the work they do for you, because volunteers are just that, they're volunteers. They don't get anything. Your words and your actions are what they will get out of it. Yes, in volunteering in classrooms like this, someone can volunteer to sit in a class that they want to take anyway. but appreciation for them showing up and doing what you want them to do matters a lot. Just those 2 words, thank you, or I appreciate you putting in the time for this. When I was president of the club, I said those words a lot, because that was how I was able to run the group for 2 years. Without those words, I would have never made it. Even thanking him, and we live in the same house.
Yeah, and expecting your volunteers to show up every single time for every event, that'll burn them out. You can ask them, but don't expect it, and don't rag them if they can't make it. You know, don't have that expectation. Volunteers are volunteers, and they have lives too. So anyway, wrap this up real quick because I got about 3 minutes left. You want to know why you're starting your group. You know, your personal reasons for starting it. Have that clear purpose and vision for what the group will be about. Recruit members and encourage buy-in. Find an organizational structure that fits your group and your purpose. Build your leadership style in a positive way. Don't go for negative leadership because that drives away your membership. And don't be afraid to make changes as the group grows, as your needs grow, as you personally grow and change. Then if anybody has any questions, we'll entertain them for the next few minutes that we have. Yes?
I believe in mentoring in every aspect of my life. So before I start a group, I find a mentor that closely resembles the type of group that I'm starting. So if it's a general pansexual BDSM group, I find a mentor who's run one before. If it's a niche group, I find someone who's run it before. And that has been valuable to me in every aspect of my life, including this one.
Absolutely. Finding a group that's successfully doing what you want to do and modeling what they're doing is a wonderful way to proceed. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. When I started T3, there were lots of other pansexual BDSM education and support groups out there. I didn't go from scratch. I went and I stole Black Rose's bylaws, you know, and I made changes in their bylaws to what fit our organization, but I was not starting from scratch. Yes?
Building in an exit strategy for the group and managing expectations on how the group is going to proceed. One of the things that I did when I was in 2014, I said, we're going to start January 1 and we're going to do some trials. And we're just going to see if the need is there. But any suggestions on, and I said, to manage your expectation, if the need isn't there within the community, no sense in having the group, you know? So any other advice on exiting and, you know, without, you know, leaving too much, I guess, collateral damage?
Yeah, a lot of groups that are incorporated that use bylaws actually specify conditions that will bring about dissolution of the group, that handle the distribution or sale of assets and what to do with any final funds. If a munch group or discussion group dissolves, there's not going to be a whole lot of collateral damage. There's not a whole lot of thought you have to put into that. But if you've been running a dungeon and you've got 10 pieces of furniture and a piece of real estate that you've got to get rid of, you do need to know what you're going to do with it. And again, look to groups that are already up and running and see what, ask, find a mentor, as she pointed out, and ask for specifics that fit the model that you're using. Without having these, I can go in and I can pull out what our leather club bylaws are about how we dissolve, you know, what we will do with our assets and things. But I couldn't necessarily answer what, you know, that for what somebody that's going to run a dungeon is going to do.
We're gonna have to take other questions out there.
But I've got some resources that I hope will prove useful for folks that are starting up a group. And, you know, the internet is not only for porn, the internet is for finding
Information.
There is actually a lot of good information out there on the internet about group startup. And any other questions?
What should we do with the little surveys?
The guy in the back of the room with waving at you with 2 hands, we'll take those.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate your time and attention. And Tori and I will be here all weekend.